You should see my outline here for the webinar here today. The main focus of this webinar is to get you familiar with some of the advanced features and the shortcuts of the EBM Electrical Bid Manager program. We're going to take a few minutes at the beginning to talk about some things in the setup, the program and the job setup areas, because they directly affect not only the shortcuts and advanced features, but a couple of the other topics we're going to cover today. We'll do a little exercise with change orders, give you some introduction or give you some background on what makes change orders different than regular bids. We'll also cover a little brief example of how to use the form letters with a change order. And then finally, we'll finish up with a little exercise on breakouts. When you get into the situations where you need to break out a job, it could be something simple like a base bid and an alternate. It could be different areas of the building. It could be just about any scenario where you need to break out the cost separately, and we'll show you how to do that. So we'll get started here. This, of course, is the screen that you see when you open up the Electrical Bid Manager. One of the things you want to make sure you've filled in is under Settings and Program Settings. There's a tab up here at the very top left for the company information. This is necessary not only for the standard reports that print out of the program, but it also captures this information for your form letters. So if you're going to do a cover letter for a change order, if you're going to do a proposal, any kind of a form, any kind of a form letter that comes out of the program, it needs this information in the setup. Another thing that's important in this setup is under the default settings, under settings, job, and commercial. These are the settings the program brings in every time you start up a new job. So of course, under job allocation, you'll have a default on the second row for your sales tax rate and whether it's applied to material or everything. And then more importantly, back on the first tab, over to the right is a tab for extensions. And then over to the right is a selection for the direct labor rates. This is where you should have set up your standard crew mix, your percentage of hours for each group, your hourly costs, and your hourly burden as far as additional cost to the employer. You could have more than one setup. You could have one for industrial work, one for prevailing wage, one for residential. There's 3 sample ones in here. And these are just samples. They're not meant to be anything that's standard or anything like that. It's going to be different for everybody, every part of the country. So one of the reasons this is important is that you can do a different setup on change orders. We'll get to that in just a second. So I won't change anything for now. But look over here to the left. The default when you create a new job is to use the target price from Epic. That's the lower price. That should be close to your cost. And then column 2 is the middle difficulty level for labor. And of course, those numbers could be different on change orders. We're going to hit OK here. Under settings, this time we're going to go to the default settings for change orders, again on commercial. So under job allocation, the sales tax rate should be the same. And back under job settings, over to extensions. This time I'll show you before I go there that default where I'm pointing with my mouse on the price column is the trade price. Think of that like a list price. It's what the manufacturers publish. So even though it's high, a lot of people accept that for change orders because it's a standardized price. It's not something you just made up. Same thing with column 3 for labor. That comes from the NECA labor manual. So again, everybody understands it's a higher number than you would bid with, but it's a standardized number that is fairly well accepted for change orders. And then, of course, on the direct labor rates, you might have something here that's more maybe what you could charge for an hourly rate on a service call. So whether that's 75, 150, whatever you're normally charged per hour is what I would put in here for the hourly rate on change orders. Again, we understand, everybody knows that all these variables are subject to your contract, they're subject to your relationship with the customer, the owner, the general contractor, and they all may be a little bit different, but the idea here is to have the settings be at your best case scenario. Highest labor rate, highest labor hours, highest material price, and then again, if we get pinched at the end and can't put as much overhead and profit as you would like to, it's not nearly as important as if you've got a higher material and labor cost already set up in the system. So one more part of the setup here, actually 2 more parts. Under settings, under default settings for Takeoff. commercial. Every Takeoff module in EBM has its own default settings. And what I mean by Takeoff modules are like feeders, branch circuits, switch gear, cable takeoff. The one we're going to be using at the very beginning is branch circuits. So when you open up branch circuits, it defaults to half-inch EMT with 3 number 12 wires. This is where it gets that default. We're going to change the default to 3/4 inch because for a lot of people, they rarely use half-inch EMT. So you'll see when I open up the first job here, that'll default to 3/4 inch. But you can also set defaults for your fittings, your supports, whatever your preferences are here. There's one for feeders, there's one for site. They all have their own setup screen. For people that do industrial work, they often change the type of conduit to maybe either rigid conduit or PVC coated, one of those options. Okay, last thing in the setup, and we'll get going with the shortcuts and advanced features, is under settings and under user maintenance. So I've got myself set up here as one of the users. I've just got my first name for my username and my password, my full name. Now this is important again because when we talk about the form letters, proposals, change orders, that kind of thing, it uses your name here in the form letter. So it's not just a matter of setting it up to set it up. My user level is administrator. That means I can get into the setup. Everything we've looked at so far, you have to have the user level set to administrator to be able to access it. Okay, so let's go and create a new job. So we're just going to call this Advanced Webinar number 1. Now, any information on this screen could be helpful to you when you do a form letter. So if you typically don't pay much attention to it, that's fine. But if you're going to get eventually to the stage where you're going to use one of the form letters, the more you fill in here, the better. The work description is one thing. I'm going to put in just new office building. It fills in your name automatically as the estimator if you log in with your name and your password. You can put in project location. You can put in the building type. Again, this information isn't used in any way in the estimate, but it can be very helpful when you do a proposal. Now I'm going to pick a customer here too. So again, when I generate a form letter, it'll have a customer to plug in. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So we're going to start in branch circuits, which is under wire and conduit takeoff. And you'll see when I open up branch circuits, it now defaults to 3/4 inch EMT instead of half-inch. I'm going to make a couple of entries here so we've got some stuff to work with. 2,600 feet, 130 runs. We don't put elbows in because it's half-inch. We're going to hit F2 takeoff. So the next entry we're going to do is going to be 1 inch EMT, but it's going to be with a pull line instead of wire. So I'll put 1 pull line. I'll put 1,500 feet, 50 runs, and just for the sake of doing it, I'm going to change the support. And we'll hit takeoff. Okay. So my next entry is going to be changing the conduit to GRC. I'm going to put in 3 number 8s, 1 number 10, 0 out the pull line, and we're going to put 170 feet, 2 runs, and 2 elbows. So it's 2 runs that totals 170 feet. I'm going to change the support. This one down here has a 1-inch unistrut strap with a rubber block and channel unistrut. So it's got the rubber block that has the unistrut built in, plus it picks up a unistrut strap. So if you've done much takeoff with rigid conduit, it's usually kind of a tedious thing because lots of extra fittings come into play that you don't typically need with the EMT. For example, if I need a conduit and an LB, I would go to select items. I would go to metallic fittings and elbows, go down to the GRC IMC fittings and conduits, and then go to LBs. We'll enter 2 of those. I'm also going to put in some insulated grounding bushings, 2 of those. And when I close this menu, I'm also going to put a note in this entry. Type RTU. I thought I clicked into there. RTU, rooftop units, numbers 1 and 2. This little note is going to appear at the bottom of this entry like a little footnote. And when I hit takeoff here, it's going to prompt me for makeup wire, because starting at number 8 and larger, you need to put the makeup in feet instead of the 5% automatically added to the wire length. So that's 5 feet at each end. That's how you do that. You put 10 feet. And you'll see that last entry, the audit trail, took up about at least a dozen lines. At the very bottom where I just clicked, that's the note that I just put on that entry. Okay, so here's the first little shortcut. It's not a big one, but it's kind of handy. We're going to change the conduit size to 3/4, and we're going to put in 4 number 10s, and we're going to put in 160 feet, 2 runs, 2 elbows, and the shortcut now is when you go to the other items tab, and this is available in all these tabs, you can hit recall last. And it brings back the same fittings, but it's smart enough to know to change the size of the conduit, because we changed that up here. So we'll go ahead and hit F2 takeoff. Now the same thing works in trenching. I'll just make a couple of quick entries in the site module. Then we'll come back here. So we're going to put in, you're going to use the saved assembly. Now I'm going to use this little shortcut quite a bit. Here's 3/4 inch with 3 number 10s. Fills it in automatically. Put in 200 feet, 5 runs, 10 elbows. We're going to go to the trench tab, and we're going to put in some trenching, ditch witch or a trencher, 6 by 24. It autofills the length. For backfill and compaction, you go back twice, 6 by 24, 200 feet. So when I hit takeoff here, and let's say I want to make another entry now with 1-inch conduit and 4 number 10s. And we'll say it's 180 feet. 4 runs, 8 elbows. Now, when I go to the trench tab again, I can hit recall last. You do have to change the quantities, but you don't have to reselect the items. So it saves a few steps there. Okay, so we're going to go back to branch circuits, 1 click here. So let's say I want to put in some more 1-inch EMT with a pull line. I did skip a step back here. I'm going to make another entry just so you see how this works. So I'm going to do 1-inch EMT with a pull line. So I'm going to put in 1,800 feet, 60 runs, and hit takeoff. So now I'm noticing that this entry comes up quite a bit. And I want to save it so the next time I need it, I don't have to go through those 3 or 4 steps to reselect it. What you can do is you can capture what's on the screen here. You hit Saved Assemblies. Now I could put it in one of these folders. From now I'm just going to add it to the end of this list by hitting Save Screen. You type in 1-inch EMT with pull line and hit OK. And I'll come back and use that in just a minute. The same thing works. There's already a list of assemblies that are already in the program. You know, your standard EMT and stuff like that. If I want to do some more 3/4 inch EMT with 3 number 12s, I don't have to reselect these. I come up here to Saved Assemblies, open up that first folder, double click on the second one, and it resets everything on the screen. So I'm going to put 2,800 feet, 140 runs, and hit takeoff. Now I need some more of that 1-inch EMT with a pull line. I just go back up to saved assemblies, 1-inch EMT. Now this little button's in all the different takeoff modules. It's in feeders, it's in fixtures, it's in site. So the things that you use in those particular modules the most, if they're not on that list, just add them. So we'll make one more entry there and we'll move on. The saved assemblies is a great little shortcut. It's a way to either use things that we've already put into here that are fairly common, or you add your own stuff and it's there from that point on. You don't have to be the administrator to do that. Anybody can add things to that list. Anybody can change things on that list. So I'm going to go into the audit trail for a couple of minutes here, show you some things that you should know about in the audit trail. I'm going to double click. That opens up the audit trail. So right off, one of the things that's handy in the audit trail is the ability to collapse it. And I've only made 9 entries so far, but if you get into jobs where you've made 1,000 entries or something like that, it's really hard to find things. One thing that helps is just to right click and collapse all. And it collapses each entry to one line so you can just identify things easier. You can right click and expand all. There's also a search feature here. And actually we just added the same search feature to the job extension. I'll show you that in a minute. Let's say that I remember I took off some 3/4 inch GRC, but I don't see it right in front of me on the audit trail. There's search button here. Now it's got to be an exact match. If you know anything about our search features, they're not very forgiving. I'm just going to type in 3/4 inch. It's not case sensitive, and I'll hit search. So it will go to the first place it finds 3/4 inch GRC. So if I want to edit that entry by hitting edit to source, let's say I'm going to bump that up to 170 feet. And when you hit save changes, it recalculates not only the conduit length, but all the fittings and wire related to that. Now you can also change just individual lines here. Maybe on this conduit here, I want to change that from 2 to 3, or let's do something a little trickier. Let's say I want to change the couplings here. I want a couple of extra couplings. I'm going to change that to 4. So when you make a change like that to an individual item, what it does is it turns the entire entry blue, because you basically changed the way that assembly was normally taken off. So it's just a way to kind of give you a little indication that you did something that the program wouldn't do on its own. So editing or double-clicking on an item lets you change an individual item. Edit to source lets you change the entire entry. And those are good throughout the audit trail, top to bottom. Okay. Let's talk about substituting next. That's something you can do from the audit trail. You can also do some types of substitution in the job extension at the end. Let's go back up to the very first entry here, and let's just say I want to change that 3/4 inch 1-hole strap to a 2-hole strap. You'll notice there's 2 substitute buttons down here. I believe the advanced substitution, which we'll get to in a minute, is not available on the standard version. It's only on the Plus and Pro. But substitute should be available on all versions. Now I have a choice here to substitute all of the 3/4 inch 1-hole straps, or before I came here I could have selected specific places to substitute, and then I might want to do only selected. We're going to do all. So we'll go to supports and hangers. We'll go to 2-hole straps, and then 3/4 inch. Gives you one final chance to confirm it. We'll say yes. And it does it throughout the job. And it turned it blue because we changed the normal assembly. Now, I can do the same thing at the end of the job extension. If I come here to reports and go to job extension and hit extension spreadsheet. So right down here, just a little ways, you'll see the 3/4 inch 2-hole strap. Let's say I want to change that to a beam clamp with a conduit hanger. Again, you can hit substitute down here at the bottom. You can also get to all these buttons by right-clicking, whatever you prefer. We'll go to substitute item. We'll go to supports and hangers. The beam clamps are down here. And we're going to do a beam clamp with the conduit hanger. And we'll do 3/4 inch again. and say yes. So the one difference in the job extension is you can't select specific entries to do it for. It's all or nothing in the job extension. If you want it to be a specific entry, you have to go back to the audit trail, identify that entry or multiple entries and do it from there. Okay. I mentioned the search feature again. Maybe again, if I want to search for that 3/4 inch GRC, there's a search button you're going to see here at the bottom on the next release. So you type in 3/4 inch GRC, and it will go find that on the audit trail right there. Okay, let's go back to the audit trail. So the advanced substitution feature is something that's really pretty powerful. If you're doing value engineering, you want to give the option to a customer to change the pipe to MC cable, or maybe you took it off as MC and they want to know how much more it would be to do it in pipe. You could also do feeder substitutions where you change it from copper wire to aluminum wire. The most commonly requested one here, I think, is the one to change it from conduit to MC cable. Now, before you do that, it's really a good idea to make a copy of the job. If you go to job file and hit copy, you can create an exact duplicate of the job and then open up the copy and make the changes in the copy. That way you're not altering the original bid. So any question, that you might need to go back to that original bid, then make a copy first to make the changes to the copy. So I'm going to hit advanced substitution here. I'm going to convert conduit to cable. Again, we could do the opposite. We could convert the type of cable. We could even change the EMT fittings. Maybe we took off the whole job as set screw steel, and we noticed it at the end, or they want to know how much more to go to compression steel. You can even do that from here. We're going to hit OK. We're going to do all identical entries. Again, you could select specific individual entries that you wanted to do the substitution for. We'll hit OK. Now, confirming each entry is just kind of, to me, a nuisance because it's going to stop every time it finds that assembly. So I'm going to say no, just go ahead and do it. And then it lets me pick all of the different cable options to substitute. So I'm going to pick the 12-2, hit select. It's going to go do its work. Now, before I finalize this entry, you'll notice it has not updated the totals over here at the bottom. We got 16,400 in material and about 643 hours of labor. So once I hit OK, it's going to update those totals. 16,000 drops down to 11,000, and the labor drops down to 416. Now, the audit trail does support one undo, if you will, one operation back, but it's only one. So I'm going to hit undo here, say yes, and it'll put it back to the way it was. Again, that's only good at the moment before you make another change. Finally, in the audit trail, you can also do multiplying. Maybe there was a part of the job you took off, or maybe everything I've taken off so far is typical for 3 areas, 3 buildings, whatever it is. Holding the shift key down, you can go all the way down to the bottom and click on the last line. And then you can multiply everything that's highlighted. Excuse me. There's the multiply button. Going to multiply by 3 and hit OK. Now you could do that by going to different entries and doing different parts of the building. I'm going to show you an example in the last part of this webinar on how to do a different way to do the multipliers, where you can put them in at the end for different areas of the job. Okay, so there's some shortcuts and branch circuits. Let's talk next about devices. Over here is Fixtures and Devices Takeoff. I'm going to go to Device Assemblies, and I'm looking for a 4-gang switch assembly. So I go to Switches, I scroll all the way down here. You'll see there's several folders starting right here, and about another 7 or 8 categories that have 4 switches. But as you could probably quickly figure out, it's not every possible combination. I'm going to give you a weird one here. We need a single pole switch, a 3-way switch, a 4-way switch, and a 3-way dimmer. So there's nothing even remotely close here. But if I go to custom assemblies here, it's pretty easy to build that on the fly. And then rather than build it from scratch, we're going to go to the Saved Assembly button. So this is kind of a different way to use Saved Assemblies. I'm going to come down here to Combos. I'm going to go to 4-gang. And you'll see how it populates it with a lot of the parts that I need. So I'm going to leave the plate, the box, the plaster ring, the wire nuts, and bar hangers. I'm just going to change the actual devices up here. So I'm going to change that to 1. I'm going to put in 1 3-way switch, 1 4-way switch, but I'm going to select a different dimmer here. So by hitting device, I can go to dimmers, going to go to incandescent and LED, and this third one here is a 600 watt, oh no, I want the 4th one. I said a 3-way dimmer. Just make a quick little note here. Okay, so to put the quantity in down at the bottom, we'll say that there's 4 of those, and then we'll hit F2 takeoff. So the other takeoff module I want to talk about shortcuts and advanced features with is light fixtures. We're going to talk about quick branch a little bit later, important again. But with lighting, you always start with the designation, A, A1, F, F1, whatever it is. And now we're going to build an assembly here. Now, how many times have you taken off 2x4 lay-ins? Instead of going here and drilling down through these menus and finding all the parts and pieces, we're going to go up to Saved Assemblies. And there's a 2x4 LED lay-in. Now, in my setup here, all that assembly brings in is the seismic wires, the ceiling wires, but you could have it set up with fixture whips and other things. I don't normally put the manufacturing catalog number in, but there's situations where I might want to do that. Let's say that the brand is Prudential. I'm hitting the P on the keyboard, double-clicking on Prudential. Here's why you might want to put the manufacturer in, because I want to, when I print this report out for my suppliers, I want them to know that I don't want any substitutions on this fixture. Now, we're going to add a fixture whip. You're probably familiar with the category here for fixture whips, but we've added another option here that a lot of people haven't come across yet. It's a little tab for conduit wire and cable. So let's say I want to use something that's not on that normal fixture whip list. Let's say I want to use some luminary cable. When I go to cable here, I can come down here to 12.2. It's got the 16 gauge wire for dimming controls and that kind of thing. And I'm going to put 20 feet in for each of these. So I started with the saved assembly. I put in a manufacturer, I put in a note, I added in under conduit wire some luminary cable. The quantity I'm going to put in 150 and hit F2 takeoff. So using saved assemblies is an important shortcut again, and you can add to that list. Now, if I've got another fixture, we'll say it's type B like boy, and it's another 2x4 LED lay-in, which, you know, not unusual to have different versions of the same fixture. Not unusual, it's probably very common. So this time, instead of using saved assemblies, I'm going to use the copy feature. By hitting the little drop-down arrow there, I can copy A, and I don't need to necessarily change anything here. It remembers the conduit wire cable tab. It has my 20 feet of the 12.2 luminary cable. I'm going to put 300 in for the quantity, hit takeoff, and I'm done. So those are the two really important shortcuts in Fixtures, the saved assemblies and the copy feature. Now finally, the other thing that you come across is fixtures that aren't in the program. And don't necessarily need to be there because you use them once in a long while. Let's say I'm looking for a 20-foot linear LED fixture. Let's make it even more weird. Let's say it's a 18-foot. And I know if I look all day, I'm not going to find that under my LED fixtures. So I'm just going to type it in. 18-foot linear LED fixture. Now, by typing that in, the program knows that there's no labor unit. It's going to ask me to plug it in myself. On manufacturer, I'm going to go to owner furnished. I'm going to add an outlet box so you can use the same accessories you normally would. You could even put in some cable with it or any other accessories you need. I'm going to put in 5 of these and hit F2 takeoff. So because I typed in my own description here, it wants me to fill the labor in. I'm going to put in 3 hours each, and we're good to go. And finally, there's a really helpful report that I find people don't always stumble on. It's the report over here on the right. It's in the fixture module, so it's going to be a report just on fixtures. Switchgear has its own report. So there's my little note on no substitutions. Owner furnished on the linear fixture. It's got my company name. I showed you that in the company setup and the phone number. And it's got the job name and the date and time. You can save that report as a PDF file, or you can print a hard copy. One last thing in this takeoff. If I want to pull an item out of Epic, I've got some kind of a Lutron dimmer that I want to pull in. If I go to temporary miscellaneous, I could either make up my own item here, or you'll have the button at the bottom to import the item from Epic. So we're going to go to the manufacturer lookup. We said we're looking for Lutron. All the way down here at the bottom is Lutron Electronics. And you'll see there's over 7,400 items. Certainly don't want to scroll through this. A couple ways to find things here. You can either search on description, or the best way is if you have the catalog number. One of the things I've always liked about the Lutron product line is their catalog numbers have some actual meaning. For example, when I go to look up by catalog number and I type in MA for Maestro and -10 for 1,000 watt, I could type out the whole thing, but I don't need to. It brings me up all the 1,000 watt Maestro dimmers. So down here near the bottom is a white one. If you don't know about this feature here too, there's a little red Y here. That's going to bring you into the catalog, to the Lutron catalog. If it doesn't land on exactly the right page, we can go forward a little bit here. There's the Maestro dimmers. So to export this item, you come up to the toolbar and hit the export button. Hit OK. And then it's going to prompt us for quantity. We'll put in 3. You may have noticed that Epic doesn't fill in labor units. If you didn't do it then, either you skipped it accidentally or intentionally, it's still going to ask you at the end to put labor in. So we'll go down to reports. Always run the job extension first. A, you need to see if there's any open items, and B, you want to just take an overall look at the job. We're going to leave the price set to target. We talked about that being the default. And up at the top right, we're leaving labor at column 2, the middle. So we'll hit extension spreadsheet. For labor on that, I'm going to go ½ an hour. And this, of course, is where you do your final editing. 3/4 inch EMT, 6572. I keep expecting that to pop up or jump up a little bit, but so far it's stayed fairly stable. I mean, it's a lot more than it was 2 or 3 years ago, but in the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, it's been fairly steady. But I'm going to change it anyway just to do it. I'm going to change it to $63. Now that only changes it in the job. So I'm going to scroll all the way down the bottom here. Again, you know, you can do substitutions here. You can delete items here. What we're really looking for is this bottom number here. This total materials, 56,000. Total labor is 2351. When you go to we can print this preview report. Not a bad idea to get a hard copy of this. And then finally, when you go to job totals, this is where it's going to prompt us to put a quote in that we haven't entered yet. So we just pop up here to quotes. We're going to put a lump sum quote in for 35,000. I'm just going to put some arbitrary overhead and profit in. I don't get a whole lot of questions in this part of the program. You know, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you want to plug an allowance in for a backhoe, if you need to add something, you just scroll down and type in something on the first blank line. This all part of the program is pretty self-explanatory. Again, I like to print the detailed report, this one down here. And I'll say yes to the quote details. Now, if you didn't put the square footage in at the very beginning, on the job setup screen, you can still do it here. Right there, we'll put square footage. And then it gives you the cost per foot. So right here is 17. That's cost before markup. That's cost with markup. 17 versus 20. Looks like we're running behind just a little bit, so I'm going to pick up the pace here. I'm going to go to job file and change order. So I'm going to create a change order for this job. Just double click on it. Now the change order setup screen looks almost identical to a new job because it is maintained as a separate job in the program. It's linked to the master job, this number 7 here. So I was going to call this, oops, I'm going to call it East Wing. On the work description here, I'm going to put in add new feeder for panel in East Wing. So it brought in the rest of the information from the original job, which in this case, the most important part is the customer. But if I'd filled in things like the address and all that, it would have pulled those in. We're going to hit OK. I'm going to go to wire and conduit takeoff because we need to take off a feeder. So we'll give this a designation, EW1. Go from the main switchboard to panel EW1. We're going to do this with 2 conduits because there's always a little bit of confusion here on what happens with multiple conduits. If you remember that everything on this page, not these tabs down here, but on the fittings and everything above it is per conduit. So I'm going to have 4 3/0 wires and 1 number 6 in each conduit. I'm going to put a total length of 160 feet, the distance from the switchboard to the panel. But because I told it 2 conduits, it's going to give me 320 feet of pipe. Now we still look at that as one run of 160 feet with 2 conduits. Elbows are per conduit, so if I put in 3, I'm going to get 6. And if I want to put this on a trapeze hanger, the simplest way to do that is to change the support to a unistrut strap, because I need to get 2 of those, 1 every conduit, 2 of those every 8 feet. Now the trapeze hanger tab is not per conduit. You're just going to tell it the spacing and what kind of trapeze hanger you need. So you go to select items. You go to trapeze hanger suspended from a steel beam. And we'll go to 2 foot wide with 2 foot rods. And it's just a confirmation you're getting 1 of those every 8 feet. So we'll close and hit takeoff. Now I just like to bump up the makeup wire a little bit on the change orders. All right, so that's all we have in the change orders, this 1 feeder. When we go to reports and go to job extension, notice that the price is now the trade price. We looked at that as the default setup at the beginning, and labor is set to column 3. So we're going to go to extension spreadsheet. Now, whether you need to print this out for yourself or the customer, you would go to preview report. I would at least print it out for yourself so you've got it there in your folder. But if the customer needs this print out, there it is. And just like a regular bid, you go to job totals, add in whatever you can for expenses and materials and some contracts. Now, on overhead and profit, we realize, of course, that your contract may limit this, but if not, we try to get as much as we can. Remember, I said that the change order has a different hourly rate for the default. There's the $80 I showed you at the beginning. Now, you might want to give them a less detailed report here. If you don't want to do detailed report, you can do just a summary. It's a 1-page report. And finally, we can generate a cover letter for this. You can get to it under reports, or you can just go down to the bottom of the job totals window and click on form letters. So I've got one here called change order. So this is what it looks like initially. This is the template. Now these templates can be modified. They're not locked into the system. So let's say I want to make a couple changes to the master template. I don't need a spot for the fax number, and I want to add a field for the contact name. So we're going to hit Edit Template. We're going to get rid of that whole line for the fax number. Oops. Try that again. Got to leave those little brackets there. And I'm going to add a new field here. So I click right where I want the new field. Come up to the top and hit Insert Field. We're looking for the one called Cust Contact. You insert it. If you don't need it in bold, you can highlight it and unbold it. So now I've made two changes to the master template. When I close this document, I want to save it. So my template is now changed from now on. If I just want to type in something, maybe I want to put a little note here under other information for this change order, you have to save it under a different name first. You don't want to edit the master template any further. So we're going to call it change order 7-1, hit save. So now when you hit edit template, you're not changing the master template. See down here at the bottom, I've given in this file a new name. So we're going to type in per revised drawings. And then again, we can close it and save it. And again, you can print out a hard copy, or when you go to print, you can also print it to a PDF file. So, you know, you can send the customer an entirely paperless change order with all the backup documentation that they require or that you want to give them. Okay, so that little exercise on change orders kind of had two little purposes behind it. One was to give you an introduction to what's different on a change order versus a new bid, show you that it's linked to a master job. See, now I've got plus signs next to the original job that was already in the system and the one we just built. So anytime there's a little plus sign, there's at least one change order linked to it. And that also kind of gave you a little introduction to the form letters, which I don't think people make as much use of it as they should. You know, if you need some help on that, you know, we can take your existing form letters and copy and paste them into the program, so you don't have to recreate them from scratch. We can copy and paste from Word into here, so there's no reason to make a whole big project out of it. But if you have the form letter built into EBM, it saves a bunch of time, and because it's plugging in information from the job. So our last little exercise is going to be breakouts. So we're going to create another job. We're going to call it the Vision Hotel. Now, at this point, it's best to set up your breakouts ahead of time. You can do it on the fly. It gets a little trickier because now you're kind of having to think about things on the fly. So I recommend going to Job Settings and setting up the sections and breakdowns the way you need it for the job. Now, we have given these just kind of an arbitrary name. Sections could be areas of the building. They could be base bid alternate. They could be east wing, west wing. They could be phase 1, phase 2, whatever you need to break it out. So we're going to use this on this job for the areas of the building. This is going to be the common area. So it's the lobby and the hallways and all that. We're going to have a different breakout for a standard room. And then finally, we're going to have a breakout for a suite. This is the kind of thing that would work well in a hotel. It would work well on a apartment complex. It would work well on a senior center, any situation where you've got typical rooms. Now the breakdowns are going to be in this job. They want to alternate in addition to the base bid. So we're going to edit breakdown 1 and call that base bid. Then we're going to edit breakdown 2, and that's going to be alternate 1. Now I'm highlighting the base bid because I want to start there. And I could have done that in reverse order. I could have made the sections the base bid and the alternate, could have made the breakdowns the different areas. It's just like columns and rows in a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter what order we did. You have another breakdown if you need to breakout level, if you want to go to divisions, and you can even keep track of it by page number. We'll keep these 2 levels for now just to keep it relatively simple. So we're going to go to the quick branch module here because I want to do the wiring for the devices at the same time I take off the devices. So when I go to quick branch, we're going to do, right now you look at the top right, we're in the common area and we're in the base bid. We're going to do the wiring in the common area in pipes. So we're going to go to conduit wire, going to go to EMT, set screw steel stranded wire. We're going to do 3/4 inch with 3 number 12s. And you can set a length here for each outlet. So 15 to 20 feet are usually pretty standard numbers people use here. You might go higher if you got high ceilings or any other factors to account for. Now we're just going to go to receptacles. Going to go to duplex. Going to go down to 20 amp spec grade in a plastic plate. And we're going to put in 50 of those in the common area. So it's the same exact assembly you would normally use, except for it's got 20 feet of conduit wire with it. So it actually makes 2 entries in the audit trail. If you look down here, one for the device and a separate entry for the conduit wire. If I want to do the same thing for a GFI receptacle, just go to GFIs, 20 amp spec grade, and I'll say I've got 8 of those in the common area. So I would go now and finish everything in the common area, the lighting, the switches, feeders, anything that's going to be in the common area. Now I'm going to make some entries into the standard room though. And I'm going to change to MC cable instead of pipe. I'll leave the length at 20 feet. And I'll go back to the duplex receptacles. Same receptacle assembly, but now we're going to get 20 feet of MC cable plus the connectors and straps. And we'll say we've got 12 of those in a standard room. And again, we may need some GFIs. We'll put in 3 of those. And again, you take off everything in the standard room, lighting, etc. And finally, we're going to come up here where it says standard room and change it to the suite. You don't have to go in the same order here. I just like to keep it a little bit consistent. And we'll say we've got 16 receptacles. And for GFIs, we'll put in 5 of those. Again, we've finished everything in the suite. So now I want to make an entry into the alternate. So I'm going to come up here where it says base bid and change it to alternate 1. And it's going to be some occupancy sensors. So they're right here above the receptacles, below the switches. We'll do priced, and we'll do wall mounted. And we'll say we've got 8 of those. Now, one thing that happens very commonly when you're doing the sections and breakdowns and any kind of breakouts like that is you get in a hurry or you don't remember to put it in the right breakdown. So that should have gone into the common area instead of the suite. So to fix something like that, you double click in the bottom part of the screen to open up the audit trail. So right now, if I click here on the wall mounted sensor and look up at the top left, I see it's in the suite. Now it's correctly in the alternate, but I need to move it to the common area. So what you do again is use the shift key to highlight everything you want to move. And you hit change breakout. This is like cut and paste. Change it from the suite to the common area. Hit OK. Hit OK again. And we're good to go. So if I go back to this line here where the wall mounted sensor started, now it's in the common area. Everything above that is in the suite or in the base bid. So every line on the audit trail has sections and breakdowns associated with it, which is really important when you get to run the reports. So that's where we're going to go next. We're going to go to job extension. So I want to look at the 3 different areas. So I'm going to change this to the sections. And I want to give this a name so I can identify what I was doing when I come back here and look at it tomorrow or a year from now. We're going to call this typical areas. So now it gives me a breakdown of the common area. followed by the standard room. And if we keep going down here, we'll have a suite. So from here, I'm going to go straight to job totals. And look at the top of the screen. The current bid summary is the one I just gave it a name called typical areas. I'm going to put 10% overhead and 10% profit. Okay. Now, the really critical thing to make sure you're keeping track of is what's included, what's not included. Now, you might think that the alternate was not included here, but the alternate is part of all the different areas. So if you don't tell it to break something out, it's not going to. If I need to see that alternate by itself, I've got to go back to the job extension and change the way the job is sorted. Now, the easiest way to do this particular one is to change it to sorting by the breakdown and uncheck the base bid. So we're going to look at the alternate one just like its own little separate job. So when you hit Save As, we'll call it alternate one. And we'll go to job totals. Now, when you start a new job totals summary, alternate one, it restarts all of the selections, all of the values in this report. Now, if this was a deductive alternate, then I probably wouldn't want to give them back overhead and profit. So you can do deducts without overhead and profit if you need to. Now, finally, if I want to see the typical areas, but I want to put multipliers on them, we just go back to job extension, and at the bottom of that first window is an option for quantity of multipliers. So we leave the common area at 1. We'll say we've got 90 standard rooms and 10 suites. So after you hit OK, you can hit Save As. So we're going to call this typical areas with multipliers. So now everything's been multiplied. The common area didn't change because the multiplier was 1. But if we come down here into the standard room, the numbers are a lot bigger. And then finally, when you go to job totals, remember it starts a new summary, so you still got to put your overhead and profit in unless you've got a default on those. Again, that's a really nice little option to have, not something you probably need to use every day, but even on like a school job, you might have typical classrooms, typical restrooms in an office building, typical offices in an office building. Once you know that that feature's there, it's something you might look for a little more often. Okay. I think that's going to wrap it up for today. I want to thank everybody for coming to the webinar here today.